Our scripture reading today is from Genesis 25, beginning at verse 19 through 34. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If this is to be the way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterwards his brother came out, with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This is the word of the Lord. Family. If you look in the home decor sections of the stores, it seems that family is supposed to embody words like live, laugh, love, and we see expectations of a family that dreams and laughs and works and plays and loves together. One more, a happy family is but an earlier heaven. This quote gets a bit more to the honest point. Every family has a story. Welcome to ours. And this one even a bit closer. We love, we share, we play, we laugh, we fight, we live. One last one, family like branches on a tree, we all grow in different directions, yet our roots remain as one. Family dynamics are a workshop for growth, and family is a place where conflict can grow and flourish. That has been true since Adam and Eve turned from God and began their turning and propensity to shame, competition, and conflict. I think I could safely say no family since then has lived without some kind of conflict. It wasn't popular to admit this in the 20th century. My dad used to brag that he and my mom had never fought, not in 65 years of marriage. He wasn't around to see her face when he was late for yet another dinner or ruined one more party because he was late from coming home from work. She was taught not to raise a fuss, not to create conflict, and she didn't. But their relationship wasn't always very authentic. Without really realizing what I was doing or thinking, I feel like somewhere in my mid-elementary school years, I decided things were going to be different when I was a mom and able to teach my children how to talk with each other and talk through conflicts. Easier said than done, but I think our current family relationships could be entitled works in progress. More vulnerable and open communications could still be developed, but the most important thing is that we have a system for asking questions, for clarifying assumptions, for being painfully real with one another because we value continued relationships. Is it magical and beautiful because my husband and I are both pastors? Nope, not at all. We all are just human. What are the sources of conflict in the family in today's story? Husband to wife. You haven't borne me any children. How are we going to carry on God's promise to my dad? She becomes pregnant, and we hear that the children struggle in Rebekah's womb. Rebekah wonders, what's going on with my children? She inquires of God and gets an answer. The sons in your womb are two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. What would you do if you got a word from God like that? Honestly, I think I would favor the younger one and do everything in my power to help that child achieve what God said would happen. Do parents favor one child over another? Even if not favored, there's a stronger connection sometimes which creates a deeper bond. And yes, sometimes one child is favored over another. The writer of Genesis turns our attention to the character of Jacob, who will carry the story of God's relationship with his people through the rest of the book of Genesis. The other characters kind of fade away, in a sense. Let's look at Jacob for a moment. The New Living Translation said he had a quiet temperament. New Revised Standard describes him as a quiet man living in tents. We tend to see him as weak, perhaps unskilled compared to Esau. Some have even called him a mama's boy. Especially compared to his father Isaac, Jacob is a fully realized, complicated, very human character. The story about Isaac portrays him primarily in passive relationship to those around him. He is nearly sacrificed in chapter 22. A wife is found for him in chapter 24, and he is duped by his wife and his son in chapter 27. It is to Rebekah, not Isaac, that God reveals the future of their sons. And perhaps most notably, it is from Jacob, Israel, not Isaac, and not Abraham, that the nation takes its name. Jacob, in contrast to his father, is anything but passive in his relationships. His conflict with his twin brother Esau begins even in the womb, where they wrestle with one another. When they are born, Jacob comes out holding on to Esau's heel. Hence his name, Yaakov, which shares the same Hebrew root as agav, meaning heel. And the same root can also mean to cheat. The name works in English as well as in Hebrew. Jacob is indeed something of a heel. He is a trickster, a man who schemes and plots, always looking for the advantage in these chapters, the advantage particularly over his twin brother Esau. The second half of the reading for this week exhibits the character of both brothers. Jacob schemes and wins his brother's birthright by coercion, while Esau gives it up for nothing more than a bowl of lentil stew. Esau is a man of the open country, a hunter, a man of strong appetites and a hot temper. He is perhaps not the brightest bulb in the tree. When he is hungry, he thinks of nothing but his stomach. After hunting all day, he comes upon Jacob in his bubbling pot of lentil stew and says in very rough Hebrew, "Let me gobble up some of this red stuff, for I am famished." Jacob sees the opportunity to take what is not his, but the narrator has no sympathy for Esau. He ate and drank and rose and departed, and thus Esau despised his birthright. This scene, while telling, is just a foretaste of what follows in chapter 27, the story of Jacob and Rebekah fooling blind Isaac into giving the blessing to Jacob rather than to Esau. That story hinges on the promise of God to Rebekah that the older brother will serve the younger one, though the means of fulfilling that promise, a task Rebekah and Jacob take into their own hands, are less than admirable. The stealing of the blessing is more significant in the whole narrative than the bargaining over the birthright, but the story of the stealing of the blessing is not included in this series of lectionary readings, perhaps because of its length. In both stories, Jacob grasps and takes that which is not his by right. The birthright is the inheritance. Later in Deuteronomy 21, the law states that the firstborn son gets a double share of the inheritance. It is a law like this that seems to be at play here in Genesis 25. Esau, as the firstborn, gets 2/3 of Isaac's wealth, while Jacob is left with 1/3. At least, that is the case until Esau sells his birthright to his brother for a pot of stew. In the story of chapters 27, Esau is to receive the blessing from his father. And it's not clear whether the blessing comes to him because he's the eldest or because he's his father's favorite. In either case, this too, Jacob acquires by deceit and cunning, and Esau responds with justified anger. Is he not rightly called Yaakov? Because he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and look, now he has taken away my blessing. This particular birthright is the promise of God passed down from Abraham to Isaac and now to Jacob. many descendants, the land of Canaan, and the bearing of blessing. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. These are the things promised to Abraham at the beginning of the family saga back in chapter 12. It's the taking of the birthright and the blessing from Esau that precipitates this family rupture and Jacob's flight from Esau's rage. Jacob is neither a moral example or a villain. He is a complicated figure. The narrator here at the beginning of this story describes him as tam, a word that means something like whole or complete, a person of integrity. Most English translations translate tam here to mean civilized or quiet, because it is difficult to describe Jacob as a man of integrity. It can also refer to someone who is intent on receiving God's blessing. Jacob displays that essential religious quality of being obsessed with God's blessing, mediated through the blessing of his father Isaac. Jacob is obsessed throughout his life with that blessing, which he can never possess as fully as it possesses him. Jacob is not an admirable figure, at least not here at the beginning of the story, but he is one who is singularly focused on obtaining the blessing of God passed down from his grandfather Abraham, and his focus on that blessing will shape the rest of his life. The blessing will bring wealth and children, but it will also mean exile, loss, and sorrow. The next several weeks' readings will tell the story of this man and trace the path of his blessing in his life as he continues to wrestle with other people and, of course, with the God who knew him before he was born. So conflict is not a new phenomenon in human relationships. How do we live beyond it or above it? How do we walk the higher road? Recently, I came across a book called The Anatomy of Peace. It's a powerful book, written kind of like a novel, described as an international bestseller that instills hope and inspires reconciliation. I haven't read the entire book yet, but it seems like it speaks of God's language and informs our human challenge in understanding others and building bridges to people in our lives. Let me just share a quote. In the way we regard our children, our spouses, neighbors, colleagues, and strangers, we choose to see others either as people like ourselves or as objects. They either count like we do or they don't. In the former case, we regard them as we regard ourselves. We say our hearts are at peace toward them. In the latter case, since we systematically view them as inferior, we say our hearts are at war. It's tempting to buy into the family conflict we find in this week's story. Some of us side with Rebekah and Jacob. Many others might side with Esau and Isaac. It's easy to make a judgment about one or the other of the characters in this story based on how we assess them or their part of the story. How can we step inside these characters' heads and approach this story with hearts of peace? And if we can do that with characters who are far removed, separated from us by thousands of years and a significant cultural divide, can we not also make a practice of approaching those in our lives and our work world, our families, and our relationships with hearts of peace? Amen.